an abandoned farmhouse standing alone in the fields. A loyal German shepherd scratches at the floorboards, refusing to give up, until beneath the rotting wood, his handler discovers a hidden trapdoor and a life hanging by a thread. This is a story of courage, betrayal, and redemption, where one dog's instinct changes everything. Before we begin, tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss these powerful, true-to-life stories. I wish you a beautiful day filled with hope and strength. Winter clung stubbornly to Willow Hollow, a small Midwestern town where the wind carried the scent of rusted tin and damp soil across fields long emptied of their crops. The streets were quiet under the fading orange wash of a late February sunset, the lampposts flickering to life along Main Street, and the old barns scattered on the outskirts sagged beneath the weight of years. Snow had mostly melted, leaving dark patches of mud and brittle grass, and the silence of the place held stories that most people pretended never happened. This was a town that wore its history like a scar, visible but rarely spoken of. Patrolling the cracked county road that wound its way between fallow fields was Ethan Monroe, a 36-year-old police officer with the kind of face that suggested he had lived through more than his share of storms. Tall and lean, but with a broad frame honed by years of service, Ethan carried himself upright, his chestnut brown hair cut short and flecked faintly with gray near the temples. His eyes, storm gray, sharp yet weary, gave away a history that stretched back beyond his badge. Once a soldier deployed overseas, Ethan had left the army seeking to protect rather than destroy, trading fatigues for a Navy patrol uniform. But the discipline, the quiet endurance, and the faint grooves etched into his face were the legacy of both wars, those abroad and those at home. His wife had left years before, unable to bear the long nights of worry and silence, and so he poured himself into the badge and his partner on 4 legs. People in Willow Hollow respected Ethan, though few claimed to truly know him. Solitude was his chosen companion, though he never admitted it aloud. Beside him in the patrol car sat Rook, his German shepherd, a 10-year-old sentinel with a sable coat dusted silver along his back. Age had not dulled the dog's presence. He radiated a quiet intensity, muscles still firm under his thick fur, eyes dark and intelligent. Scars along his right flank hinted at past skirmishes, reminders of nights when he had stood between Ethan and danger. Though technically retired from active K-9 duty, Rook was never left behind. He was more than a partner. He was family, a creature whose loyalty had carried Ethan through years of silence and struggle. The dog had a calm, patient nature most of the time, often lying still with his nose resting against the car window, but when danger loomed, his entire body transformed into a tense, bristling shield. Ethan often thought of Rook as the last anchor keeping him grounded, a guardian not only of his life, but of his sanity. The patrol car rolled slowly over uneven asphalt, headlights bouncing off skeletal fence posts leaning inward like tired shoulders. Ethan's hand rested loosely on the steering wheel, though his gaze was fixed and steady. Willow Hollow did not often stir with crime, but the quiet towns were the ones that could surprise you, and he trusted Rook's instincts more than his own eyes. He glanced briefly at the passenger seat, at the German shepherd breathing slow and deep, the rise and fall of his chest steady. Then it happened. Rook's ears twitched sharply, his head lifted, and a deep growl rumbled from his chest before breaking into a sharp bark. His nose pressed to the window, body stiff as if magnetized to something in the distance. Ethan straightened immediately, the soldier's reflexes still alive in him. "What is it, boy?" he muttered, pulling the cruiser to a gradual stop. He followed the dog's gaze through the windshield. There it was, a farmhouse slumped against the horizon, framed by tall, wild grass that stretched past the knees. An image more shadow than structure. The wood was weathered gray, panels rotted, roof sagging inward. Beside it leaned a barn, door half open like a mouth ready to swallow what little light remained. The place had been empty for decades. Ethan knew the stories. Willow Hollow whispered about that farm, like one whispered about ghosts. Rumors of hidden liquor during Prohibition, of smugglers using the barn as a haven, and of bootleggers whose restless spirits still walked those overgrown fields. Ethan didn't believe in ghosts, but he did believe in footprints, and Rook's reaction told him something more than folklore lingered there. Ethan cut the engine. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the ticking of cooling metal and the restless rustle of grass in the breeze. He exhaled, stepped out, boots crunching against gravel, the chill in the air biting against his skin even through the navy uniform coat. Rook leapt gracefully down from the car, landing with a controlled thud, his nose already sweeping the ground, inhaling deep, pulling gently at the leash as though tugging Ethan toward the house. For a 10-year-old dog, he moved with startling agility, his tail held low but stiff, ears pinned forward, every nerve alive with focus. Ethan's jaw tightened as he glanced at the sagging structure. "Nobody's lived here in 20 years," he murmured, half to himself, half to the memory of the townsfolk's warnings. Still, he felt the weight of unease coil in his stomach. He had been trained to follow evidence, not folklore, yet Rook was not the type to stir without cause. As the evening light thinned, the farmhouse stood in stubborn silence, a sentinel of secrets waiting to be uncovered. Ethan took a slow breath, adjusted the strap of his flashlight at his belt, and let Rook lead him a few cautious steps forward. Each crunch of gravel beneath his boots seemed louder than it should, echoing against the hollow vastness of the fields. The wind picked up, rattling the loose boards of the barn, and the front door of the farmhouse creaked faintly on rusted hinges, swaying with the gust. Ethan stopped at the edge of the path. His gray eyes swept the windows, most broken, shards of glass catching the last orange threads of sunset. Dust swirled in the beams of light, but inside the darkness looked thick and endless, like a throat leading to somewhere he had no desire to step. Rook stood taut beside him, his body angled forward, his growl low but steady. The German shepherd was telling him what he already knew. This silence was not ordinary. For a long moment, Ethan considered turning back. He could radio in, call for another officer, mark the place for inspection in daylight. But daylight often burned away more than it revealed, and his instincts, sharpened by war, tempered by loss, told him that, whatever lingered in that farmhouse, it was alive tonight. He glanced at Rook, who stood ready, eyes unblinking, and gave a small nod as if the two had reached an agreement. Together, man and dog stepped toward the abandoned farmhouse, the first echoes of their approach breaking a silence that had ruled for decades. The wind moaned through the warped slats of the farmhouse as Ethan pushed the swollen door wider, its hinges groaning like a wounded thing. The smell inside was immediate: mold, damp wood, the faint acidic bite of rust that lingered too strongly to be natural. Dust motes swirled in the shafts of fading light that pierced broken windows, and every step Ethan took made the floor complain beneath his boots. Rook slipped inside first, moving with the precision of a shadow, nose sweeping low, ears pricked forward. His tail was stiff, his body angled like a compass needle pointing to something unseen. The interior was almost bare, save for a few collapsed chairs and the skeletal remains of a dining table in the corner, wallpaper peeled in ragged strips, revealing boards beneath that had warped and bowed with time. But even here, Ethan's eyes were drawn not to the ruins, but to Rook's behavior. The German shepherd circled a far corner, pawing at the floor with sharp urgency, claws scraping against wood. He barked suddenly, the sound echoing against the hollow walls, making Ethan's skin prickle. Ethan crouched, running his hand across the planks. At first it seemed nothing more than rot, but his fingertips caught on an edge that did not align, seams that were too precise. "Fresh work?" he muttered. The boards here had been replaced more recently than the rest of the house, as if someone had wanted to cover something. He reached for the pry bar clipped to his belt, slid the iron tip against the seam, and pressed down. The wood resisted, but Rook barked again, pawing furiously as though to hurry him along. With a grunt, Ethan levered harder until the plank shifted, and with a dull crack it came free. The hollow beneath exhaled a gust of cold air that reeked of iron and mildew. A trapdoor revealed itself, newer bolts affixed to old framing, as though someone had built secrecy into the bones of this house. Ethan's breath clouded faintly in the sudden chill. He adjusted the flashlight on his belt, the beam cutting into the darkness below, but it seemed to swallow the light whole. Rook whined softly, hackles raised, and pressed his muzzle near the opening, ears twitching to every sound. Ethan whispered, "Easy, boy," though the reassurance was for himself as much as for the dog. He slid the bar under another plank when his radio crackled softly at his side, startling him. He clicked it once to silence the static, but chose not to call in yet. Something about this felt fragile, as though involving too many ears too soon might scatter whatever truth lingered here. A scuff of gravel outside made him pause. He turned sharply, hand moving instinctively toward the grip of his sidearm, but the sound faded. He stepped back to the doorway, scanning the fields, where the grass bent under the restless wind. No movement beyond nature's own. Still, the unease lingered. He returned to the trapdoor, prying a second plank free. The gap widened, the smell thickened, and now he could see the outline of iron hinges set into concrete below. Whoever built this had not been careless. This was no storage pit. It was deliberate, hidden, secretive. He felt the cold coil in his stomach again. That soldier's instinct honed in war zones, the kind that told him this was not just another night. Rook stiffened suddenly, ears pinned forward, his body pressed low against the floor. He growled, not loud, but with the kind of quiet intensity that spoke of danger close at hand. Ethan froze, listening. Then he heard it. Faint, almost inaudible, the creak of a stairwell, old wood shifting under weight, somewhere deeper inside the house. He straightened slowly, flashlight raised, scanning the hall to his left. The narrow corridor led to what had once been a kitchen. Counters collapsed under rot, windows boarded crudely. A second door sagged half open, leading down a slanted stairway. The smell drifting from it was worse. Damp stone mixed with the metallic tang of something unnatural. Ethan moved forward cautiously, Rook at his side, muscles taut, every step measured. The stairwell groaned beneath his weight as he descended. Dust drifted like ash in the narrow beam of his light. The cellar opened into a low chamber, stone walls slick with condensation, crates stacked against one side. Most were collapsed, but a few remained intact, marked with faded lettering. He brushed his hand across one, liquor brands from decades past, remnants of prohibition stories that had birthed the house's ghostly reputation. But beneath the history, something newer bled through. Scuff marks on the stone floor, footprints faint but visible in the dust. Rook sniffed intently at the crates, then stopped at the back wall. His body went rigid. He barked once, sharp and insistent, then pawed at the corner. Ethan swung the flashlight. The wall seemed solid, but a portion of stone had been patched clumsily with newer mortar. Seams uneven, cracks revealing what lay behind was not original. As he reached out to touch the wall, his mind flashed to a memory he hadn't wanted. Sand, heat, and a compound overseas where his unit had found a door, not unlike this one, hidden beneath a facade of stone. That discovery had ended in gunfire. He clenched his jaw, forcing the memory back, but the unease sharpened. He had learned long ago. Places built to hide are never empty. He exhaled slowly, turning to Rook. The German shepherd stared back at him, eyes unblinking, tail stiff, a living reminder of loyalty in the face of fear. "We'll see what you found," Ethan murmured and pressed harder against the wall. But before he could act further, his flashlight flickered across something small near the crates. A leather glove lay in the dust, stiff with dried mud. He picked it up, turning it over. The fingertips were frayed, and inside, faint indentations of initials scratched into the lining. R.L. The letters jolted him. He knew the name. Rick Landry, a former member of the mayor's security detail, a man who had been quietly dismissed months earlier after an altercation in a bar. Rick had been tall, broad-shouldered, his temper notorious, his departure hushed by officials eager to avoid scandal. Ethan remembered the smirk the man wore the last time he saw him. To find his mark here was no coincidence. Rook barked suddenly, drawing Ethan's attention back. The dog had pressed both paws against the patched wall, claws scraping. A faint, hollow echo sounded, betraying the space beyond. Ethan's pulse quickened. The dog had found what the house itself wanted hidden. Above them, the wind battered the farmhouse, rattling boards like bones. But down here, the silence was heavier, thicker. Ethan stepped back, holstered his flashlight, and pulled the pry bar again. His shoulder tightened, ready for the force it would take to break through. He glanced once more at Rook. The dog's eyes gleamed in the beam, steady, unwavering. The farmhouse had kept its secrets for decades. Tonight, under Rook's relentless bark and pawing claws, one of those secrets was about to give way. Ethan braced his shoulder against the pry bar, sweat dampening his collar despite the chill that rose from the cellar. The patched wall gave a groan and then a crack, sending small fragments of mortar scattering across the stone floor. Rook barked once, sharp and triumphant, as the hole widened. Ethan swung the flashlight beam through the gap, and the light fell on rusted hinges, a steel door hidden behind the false wall. His stomach tightened. The glove marked RL had not lied. Someone had built this place to imprison. The handle was corroded, cold as ice when Ethan grasped it, but with enough force the latch gave way. The door screeched open, echoing like a scream in the tight space. What the light revealed made Ethan's breath stall. Curled on the ground inside, her arms bound cruelly with plastic ties and a gag stretched across her mouth, was a young woman. Her clothes, once professional, were torn and stained, the pale fabric clinging to scraped knees and dirt-streaked skin. Blonde hair tangled in knots clung to her sweat-damp face. Her eyes, wide and glassy in the beam of Ethan's flashlight, locked onto him with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. She trembled as if she no longer believed rescue possible. Ethan dropped to one knee, lowering his voice to the gentleness he rarely used. "Easy, I'm here to help." Rook stood rigid beside him, tail stiff, teeth bared at the shadows as though still guarding against unseen threats. Ethan slid the gag down carefully, wincing at the red welts pressed deep into her cheeks. Her lips parted, voice cracked but urgent. Claire Whitmore." The name cut through the air like a blade. Ethan knew it immediately. Daughter of Mayor Douglas Whitmore, 28, reported missing 3 nights earlier. The entire town had whispered theories. She had run away in protest of her father's land deals. She had fled to embarrass him. Or worse, she had been silenced. Seeing her here, bound like this, gave lie to all of it. This was no escape. This was abduction. Ethan worked quickly, cutting the ties with his utility knife. Her wrists were raw, skin abraded where she had struggled against the plastic. She hissed softly when freed, clutching her arms to her chest. Rook moved close, lowering his head, nudging her hand gently with his nose. The shepherd's warm presence pulled a small, broken sound from her lips that might have been the beginning of a sob. He saved me," she whispered hoarsely, though Ethan knew she meant more than just this moment. Claire Whitmore, even in her battered state, carried traces of the woman she had been before this nightmare. Tall and willowy, with a presence sharpened by years of standing in council chambers and community meetings, she had always been described as her father's opposite. Where Douglas was heavyset and forceful, Claire was precise, intelligent, and unafraid to challenge power. People said her mother's death when Claire was 14 had forged her steel. She had been the one to comfort her younger cousins, to speak at the funeral when adults could not. That fire had only grown brighter as she opposed the land project that would displace families. Now, bruised and trembling in the cellar, that fire flickered, but it had not gone out. Ethan helped her to her feet. "We need to move," he said quietly. But Claire shook her head, panic flashing in her eyes. "They'll come back. They said they were moving me soon." Her voice faltered. "Said the window was closing." Ethan steadied her with a hand on her shoulder. "Not tonight. Not while I'm here." Above, the farmhouse groaned with the wind. But Ethan knew the danger was not the building. It was whoever had left her here. He swept his flashlight across the small chamber. The floor bore marks of dragged crates, and in the corner, a pile of rope still sticky with dried blood confirmed this was more than just a single captivity. This room had seen others. Rook sniffed hard at the edges, his body tense, hackles raised, before growling low at a dark stain in the dirt. Ethan's gut twisted. Whoever had built this place had meant it to hold people, not things. Claire swayed, exhaustion catching her, and Ethan steadied her. "Lean on me." Together they edged out of the chamber and into the cellar proper. Rook padded ahead, every step measured, his head turning sharply at faint noises. The beam of light caught another clue, mud smeared against the concrete, a footprint fresh enough that the edges had not yet crumbled. Ethan crouched, studying the tread. It was unique, circular ridges near the heel. his jaw clenched. Landry subplot unfurled even as the main horror solidified. Upstairs in town, at a small diner on Main, reporter Lana Breck typed furiously at her laptop. Her auburn hair fell loose against her cheek, glasses slipping down her nose as she scrolled through public records. Lana was 34, sharp-eyed and relentless. A woman shaped by losing her younger brother to an overdose linked to the very narcotics pipelines now suspected of flowing through Willow Hollow. That loss had carved a streak of suspicion in her, fueling her investigations into corruption. Tonight, she was working late, piecing together land deeds, noticing patterns of shell companies connected to Kendrick Holdings. She had no idea that at this very moment, Ethan was standing in the middle of the proof her articles only hinted at. Back in the farmhouse, Claire pressed close to Ethan, her breath quick and shallow. "It wasn't random," she whispered. "They wanted leverage. Against my father, against the town." Her eyes met Ethan's, raw with truth. "This isn't just about me." Rook barked suddenly, sharp and urgent, spinning toward the stairwell. The sound above, boards creaking, boots striking gravel, snapped Ethan's attention to the fact they were not alone. He pulled, Claire gently but firmly toward the shadows of the cellar wall, gesturing for silence. His heart pounded, but his face remained controlled, soldier's discipline locking into place. Rook crouched low, growl vibrating through his chest like thunder waiting to break. The moment stretched taut, as if the farmhouse itself held its breath. Ethan drew his pistol, keeping it low, eyes on the stairwell. The door above shifted, hinges groaning. Someone else was in the house. The rescue was no longer just a discovery. It had become a standoff. The farmhouse above creaked again, the sound of boots grinding across warped boards. Ethan kept his pistol steady, his other hand gently guiding Claire behind a stack of crates. Her breath came fast, shallow, her knuckles white as she clutched the sleeve of his uniform. Rook crouched low beside her, teeth bared in silence, eyes fixed on the stairwell like he was already measuring the distance to a throat. The wooden door at the top shifted once more before swinging wide. A shaft of pale moonlight spilled down the crooked stairs, framing the silhouette of a tall figure descending with cautious steps. Behind him, two others moved, their shadows spilling across the cellar walls. The first man came into view, Rick Landry. He was broad-shouldered, his once pristine posture softened by months of hard living. His face was a patchwork of scars and stubble, jaw square, but lips pulled into a sneer that came as naturally as breathing. His dark eyes swept the cellar with the confidence of someone who believed fear was the only currency that mattered. Rick had once been an officer of the law, a protector, but his dismissal after a violent brawl in a neighboring county bar had burned away any pretense. Now, his lean frame carried the restlessness of a man who had nothing left to lose, and he wore it like armor. Behind him followed two men who looked less assured but equally dangerous. One was Cole Abrams, mid-30s, lanky with a gaunt face, his blonde hair thinning unevenly across his scalp. His eyes darted rapidly, betraying nerves he tried to smother with a tight grip on the crowbar in his hand. Cole had grown up on the edges of Willow Hollow, known for drifting from job to job, quick to fold under pressure, yet cruel when he thought no one stronger was watching. The other was Troy Maddox, older, heavy-set with a thick neck and hands like shovels. His gray beard was matted, his cheeks pockmarked, his body carrying the weight of years spent in small-time rackets. Troy was not intelligent in strategy, but followed orders with blind loyalty. His loyalty often bought with whiskey or cash. Rick's boots hit the stone floor, and he raised a flashlight, its beam slicing through the dark. "Check the wall again," he barked. Cole moved nervously to the patched mortar Ethan had broken through. His voice cracked when he saw the gaping steel door wide open. "Rick, someone's been here." Ethan stepped forward from the shadows, gun trained steady. "Drop it. All of you." His voice carried the clipped authority of command, the kind that made soldiers listen even when their hearts were hammering. Claire gasped softly behind the crates, but Ethan gave her the slightest shake of his head, signaling silence. Rook growled, the sound low and rumbling, vibrating through the air like a taut wire about to snap. Rick froze, then let out a harsh laugh. "Monroe. Of course it'd be you, always sniffing around where you don't belong." His eyes cut to Rook. "And the mutt." Should have guessed. He lifted his hand slightly, but the sneer never left his face. You think you got the upper hand? This is my ground now. Before Ethan could answer, Claire stood shakily from her hiding place. Her voice cracked but carried steel. This isn't your ground, Rick. You put me in that room. You think I'll stay silent now? Her blonde hair hung tangled across her bruised cheek, but her posture was tall, her gaze steady. For a moment, even Rick faltered at the sight of the woman he had treated like a pawn, now daring to confront him. Troy shifted uncomfortably, his grip tightening on the pipe in his hand. Boss, he muttered. Rick's eyes narrowed, but he smirked, feigning control. The mayor's girl's got bite. Shame it won't matter. Ethan took a half step forward, pistol still leveled. It matters right now. You'll drop your weapons, or this ends ugly. He scanned their hands, finger brushing the trigger guard lightly, ready. Cole's nerves cracked first. He dropped the crowbar with a clang that echoed through the cellar. Rook barked instantly, lunging forward 2 steps, before Ethan snapped a command to hold. The shepherd froze mid-motion, teeth glinting in the pale light, but his growl deepened, vibrating through his chest. Rick, undeterred, gestured at Troy with a flick of his chin. Troy raised the pipe higher, but Ethan shifted his aim sharply. Don't, Ethan said, his voice flat and unshaken. Claire's breathing quickened as she clutched the crate edge, but then, in a burst of determination, she snatched up a broken chair leg lying near her feet. Her hands shook, but her stance was steady, and she raised the makeshift weapon toward Rick, blocking his path to escape. Her lips pressed into a tight line. You're not leaving, she said. The words hung heavy in the cellar. Rick's sneer faltered for a fraction of a second, replaced by recognition that the woman he'd imprisoned was no longer cowering. Ethan seized the moment. On the ground. Now Rick's jaw clenched, his pride warring with the reality of the gun aimed at his chest and the German shepherd poised to strike. Slowly, with deliberate slowness, he lowered to his knees. Troy hesitated, but seeing Rick surrender, his broad shoulders slumped and he let the pipe clatter to the floor. Ethan moved swiftly, one hand keeping the pistol trained, while the other grabbed the zip ties from his belt. Within moments, Rick's wrists were bound, then Troy's. Cole already sat trembling against the wall, his thin frame shaking as sweat ran down his forehead. For a heartbeat, the cellar was filled only with the sound of Claire's ragged breathing and Rook's steady growl easing into silence. Ethan finally exhaled, lowering his weapon slightly. Claire let the chair leg slip from her fingers, her knees threatening to buckle, but Rook moved to her side, nudging her gently until she steadied again. She managed the faintest smile through tears, stroking his head with trembling fingers. Twice, she whispered. He's saved me twice tonight. Ethan keyed his radio, his voice clipped but urgent. Dispatch, this is Officer Monroe. I need immediate backup and medics at the Old Willow farmstead. 3 suspects in custody, 1 victim recovered, condition fragile but stable. His words cut through the static, crisp and undeniable. Above them, the farmhouse moaned under the weight of wind and time, but within the cellar, the balance had shifted. The house was no longer a prison. It was a crime scene, its silence broken by truth. The cellar reeked of rust, sweat, and fear. Ethan kept his pistol steady until the last of the zip ties cinched shut around Rick Landry's wrists. The once proud officer knelt with his head lowered, hair plastered to his forehead, his breathing heavy, but his eyes sharp as glass shards. Cole Abrams sat trembling against the wall, muttering half-formed excuses, while Troy Maddox leaned against a crate, his massive shoulders sagging, as if the fight had drained out of him the moment Rick surrendered. Rook paced in front of them like a silent sentinel, his black and silver fur bristling, amber eyes never leaving the captives. Every so often he gave a low growl that sent Cole flinching. Claire sat nearby, her back against the damp stone, exhaustion weighing heavy on her frame. She hugged her knees to her chest, watching silently, her eyes red-rimmed but unbroken. The radio at Ethan's shoulder crackled with the faint response of dispatch acknowledging his call for backup. Relief stirred, but unease grew sharper. He had learned long ago that sometimes the most dangerous moment came after victory, when adrenaline faded and reality sharpened. He looked at Rick, whose lips twisted into a smirk. "You think this ends here, Monroe? We're just the surface. cut us down, and something worse grows in our place. Before Ethan could answer, the sound of tires crunching on gravel drifted from above. His heart tightened. He hadn't heard sirens. Whoever arrived wasn't back up. He motioned for Claire to stay low, then pressed a finger to his lips before signaling Rook. The dog moved instantly to his side, muscles taut. Above them, the farmhouse groaned as doors banged open. Voices carried 3, maybe 4 men. Ethan pushed Claire deeper behind the crates. Her breath caught in her throat, but she nodded quickly. Moments later, heavy boots descended the cellar stairs. The first man into view was tall, lean, with a trim beard and slicked back hair streaked with silver. He wore a long brown coat despite the mild night, and his presence carried quiet authority. His name was Darius Keene, mid-40s, a former contractor turned enforcer for whoever held power in the shadows. His face was weathered, skin tanned from years outdoors, but his eyes were cold, calculating, always weighing profit over principle. Darius had grown up poor in neighboring counties, hardened by years of betrayal, and now wore cynicism like armor. Behind him trailed 2 younger men, rough around the edges, carrying the swagger of those who thought they were untouchable. One, Milo Griggs, was barely 30, thin and wiry, his dark hair cropped short, tattoos curling up his neck. He had a twitch in his jaw that made him seem restless, like violence was always a heartbeat away. The other, Sammy Rourke, was heavier, broad across the chest, his red beard trimmed neatly, but his hands scarred. Sammy had once been a farmhand before falling into petty crime, his loyalty tied to whoever offered him belonging. Darius's eyes swept the cellar quickly, landing on Rick and the others bound on the floor. He let out a sharp laugh. Well, looks like the mayor's little family mess finally caught up with itself. He stepped closer, flashlight beams sweeping across Ethan before landing on Claire. And there she is. Claire Whitmore, the bargaining chip. Ethan tightened his grip on his pistol. Don't take another step. His voice was steady, though his chest thudded with tension. Rook barked once, sharp and fierce, body lowered like a spring waiting to be unleashed. Darius raised his hands mockingly. Relax, officer. I'm not here to shoot it out with you, but you're playing in waters deeper than you know. This isn't about a missing girl anymore. This is leverage, land, money. And you've walked right into the middle. His gaze lingered on Claire, then slid back to Ethan. You should walk away now. Pretend you never saw this. Claire pushed herself shakily to her feet, voice ragged but clear. You're lying. You think you can scare him like you scared me? You'll never silence me again. Her defiance lit the chamber like a spark, and for a moment, even the younger men hesitated. Darius's smirk faltered, then sharpened into disdain. You've got spirit. Shame it'll cost you. He flicked a glance at Milo, who shifted nervously, hand brushing the grip of a pistol at his belt. Ethan caught the motion instantly, aiming sharply. Don't even think about it. The stalemate stretched thin. Then headlights flared outside, and the distant wail of sirens finally cut through the night. Backup had arrived. Darius cursed under his breath, signaling his men. We'll finish this later. With fluid motion, he turned, retreating up the stairs, Milo and Sammy close behind. Ethan lunged forward but stopped, unwilling to leave Claire unprotected. Rook barked furiously at the retreating footsteps, his body vibrating with frustration, but he obeyed Ethan's call to heel. Seconds later, sheriff's deputies poured into the farmhouse. Among them was Deputy Kyle Mendez, a man in his late 20s with sandy hair and a steady, kind expression. Kyle was broad-shouldered but approachable, his blue eyes carrying warmth even in tense moments. He had grown up in Willow Hollow, son of a mechanic, and was known for his calm patience with both townsfolk and fellow officers. Ethan had mentored him years ago, teaching him discipline and caution, and Kyle had carried that guidance with respect ever since. Monroe, Kyle called, descending the stairs with 2 deputies close behind. We got your call. His eyes widened when he saw Claire. Jesus, you found her. Claire managed a faint nod, leaning against the wall. Kyle immediately removed his jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders. You're safe now, he said gently, his tone protective like that of an older brother. Ethan finally holstered his weapon, tension draining though his mind churned with what Darius had said. There was more behind this than Rick's twisted loyalties. There were deeper hands pulling strings, and now they knew Ethan was in the way. As deputies secured Rick, Troy, and Cole, dragging them into the patrol vehicles outside, Ethan stood with Kyle near the cellar's threshold. "They'll try again," Ethan muttered. Kyle's jaw tightened. "Then we'll be ready. You're not alone in this." Rook sat at Ethan's side, breathing steady, amber eyes fixed on the doorway where Darius had vanished. Claire, wrapped in Kyle's jacket, whispered softly, "He wanted me to believe they'd move me soon. Said the window was closing. If he's still out there, they won't stop." Outside, the sirens faded into the cold night as the convoy of patrol cars carried the arrested men away. But Ethan knew the battle had only begun. The town of Willow Hollow had been cracked open tonight, and shadows were pouring out. Morning arrived gray and heavy over Willow Hollow, fog clinging to the streets as if reluctant to release the night's secrets. Ethan sat in the small interrogation room of the county sheriff's office, his uniform collar loosened, a bruise darkening across his cheekbone, where Rick Landry's elbow had caught him during the scuffle. Beside him, Rook lay stretched out, head resting on his paws, eyes half-lidded but alert. The German shepherd's fur was matted from the night's struggle, streaked with dust, but his calm presence was a reminder that not all battles left you broken. Across the table sat Alicia Kingsley, a state prosecutor sent down after news of Claire Whitmore's rescue spread overnight. She was in her late 30s, with an angular face framed by sleek black hair cut just above her shoulders. Her gray suit was pressed crisp, her posture straight, radiating authority sharpened by years of wrestling with corruption cases. But behind the steel in her eyes, there was fatigue, lines carved by too many nights spent fighting institutions that seemed to grow new heads each time she cut one down. Alicia had built a reputation for refusing bribes, a trait that had earned her enemies, but also respect. Losing her younger sister to a drunk driving accident years ago had anchored her relentless pursuit of justice. She had sworn no powerful man or hidden network would ever bury truth again. She tapped a pen against a folder, thick with reports. 3 men in custody, but they're pawns, she said flatly. Landry will talk eventually, but he's not the root. He's a tool. The real question is who's paying him. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck, his storm gray eyes fixed on the folder. Darius Keene. He showed up before backup. He knew where Claire was, and he wasn't there for cleanup. He was there for leverage. Alicia raised a brow. Keene. Contractor, yes, but his records are clean. Too clean. The kind of clean that tells me he's laundering for someone bigger. Rook lifted his head, ears flicking at the sound of Alicia's clipped voice. He sniffed the air, then sighed and lowered his head again. Ethan reached down, running a hand across the shepherd's neck absent-mindedly. Meanwhile, in another corner of Willow Hollow, reporter Lana Breck hunched over her cluttered desk at the Willow Gazette. Her auburn hair was tied back loosely, glasses slipping down her nose as she pored over land deed transfers and zoning permits. Stacks of papers, coffee cups, and her late brother's dog-eared Bible crowded the desk. Lana had hardly slept, the adrenaline of the night's revelations driving her. She scribbled notes furiously. Shell companies tied to Kendrick Holdings. Land parcels purchased under false fronts. The pattern was too deliberate to ignore. She muttered under her breath. They're turning farmland into corridors. Not for crops. For trucks. Her fingers paused on a deed that bore the mayor's signature. Douglas Whitmore had approved permits without review. Her stomach sank. Was it corruption or coercion? Back at the sheriff's office, Claire Whitmore sat wrapped in a blanket on a bench outside the interrogation rooms. Her blonde hair was brushed clean now, though bruises still marred her arms. She looked smaller without the forceful presence of the councilwoman she used to be, but her eyes held quiet fire. Deputy Kyle Mendez, his sandy hair tousled from the long night, brought her a cup of tea. "You're safe here," he said softly, settling beside her. Kyle was known for his calm steadiness, and his presence carried the kind of warmth that made people trust him. Claire managed a faint smile. "Safe for now, but you and I both know Darius won't stop. He said the window was closing. That means a deadline." Kyle's jaw tightened. "Then we find out what's supposed to happen when that window shuts." Ethan entered, dropping into a seat opposite Claire. You told me last night they were talking about leverage. What exactly? Claire's hands tightened around the cup. They wanted my father's signature. Something to do with development permits. They said the mayor was the only obstacle, that once he signed, shipments would flow without inspection. She drew a shaky breath. They talked about trucks disguised as chemical transport, a distribution hub. Alicia stepped into the hall, her heels clicking against the linoleum. That tracks, she said, holding a file. We flagged similar permits in Illinois and Oklahoma. Same parent corporation, Kendrick Holdings. They bury narcotics under legitimate paperwork. The room thickened with silence. Rook rose and padded closer to Claire, nudging her knee with his nose. She reached down, stroking his head, whispering, "Thank you." Subplot threads pulled tighter across town. Lana, still at her desk, picked up her phone and dialed an old contact. Mark Hollis, a retired trucker in his late 50s who lived just outside Willow Hollow. Mark was a big man with calloused hands and a weathered face, his gray beard trimmed short. He had the kind of straightforward honesty that came from decades behind the wheel. After being injured in an accident years ago, he'd turned bitter toward the industry, especially the corporations that exploited drivers. "Lena," his gravelly voice answered, "if they're talking chemical trucks, it's not fertilizer. It's cover. You don't need permits unless you're moving volume." "Big volume." Lana scribbled his words, heart pounding. She whispered, "Thank you, Mark." Back in the sheriff's office, Alicia turned to Ethan. "We'll need surveillance on any warehouses tied to Kendrick. And we'll need you, Monroe. You know Keene. You've faced him already." Ethan's storm-gray eyes hardened. "Then we go where he doesn't expect us. If they're setting up a hub, Rook will find it before their men do." Claire shifted, drawing herself taller despite the exhaustion lining her face. "And I'll testify. Whatever it takes, they tried to bury me alive. They won't bury the truth." For the first time in hours, Ethan allowed the faintest smile. He rested a hand on Rook's back. "Then we'll drag it into the light." As the fog outside began to lift, the web of corruption that had stretched across Willow Hollow started to unravel. But Ethan knew this was only the beginning. The night settled over Willow Hollow like a heavy cloak, the fog lifting just enough to reveal the highway stretching out of town. Ethan Monroe sat behind the wheel of a black unmarked SUV, his storm-gray eyes focused on the faint glow in the distance where a warehouse complex sat near the industrial outskirts. Beside him, Alicia Kingsley reviewed maps and schematics spread across her lap, the soft glow of a tablet lighting her angular features. Her dark hair framed her stern expression, and though she looked composed, Ethan caught the tightness in her jaw. In the back seat, Rook lay poised, ears pricked, his black and silver coat sleek under the dim interior light. His amber eyes followed every sound outside the vehicle, and though he remained still, his muscles vibrated with readiness. Age had silvered his back, but in moments like this, he seemed timeless, an eternal guardian. 2 vehicles idled behind them, filled with sheriff's deputies and a small state tactical team. The team leader, Sergeant Daniel Vance, stepped out to join Ethan and Alicia. Vance was in his early 40s, tall with a square build, his shaved head glistening faintly under the floodlights. His demeanor was calm, but not detached. He was the kind of man who had carried too many young officers home in body bags and had learned to fight caution with discipline. His voice carried gravel when he spoke. "Keene's crew is inside. Scouts saw activity an hour ago. We go in quiet, move fast." Ethan nodded, his voice low. "Rook will lead. He can track what we can't see." Meanwhile, across town, Lana Breck was racing her own clock. The newsroom was nearly empty, but her desk glowed with the light of 3 monitors. Her auburn hair was pinned up haphazardly, glasses slipping as she typed furiously. She had pieced together corporate filings, bank transfers, and land deeds into a web that painted Kendrick Holdings not as a construction investor, but as a narcotics empire disguised as industry. Her latest call had been to a contact in Chicago, a financial analyst who confirmed offshore accounts tied directly to Darius Keene's shell companies. Lana's heartbeat raced. She knew this story, once published, would detonate across the state, but it also made her a target. Still, the memory of her brother's overdose steeled her resolve. She whispered to herself, "This time, I won't let them bury it." Back at the warehouse, Ethan slipped on a tactical vest, the chill of night air biting his skin through the fabric. He glanced at Alicia, who holstered her sidearm with steady hands. She wasn't field-trained like he was, but she had insisted on being present. "I need to see it with my own eyes," she had told him earlier, her voice sharp with conviction. "If I'm going to put Keen away, I need evidence, not whispers." The team moved into formation, approaching the warehouse's southeast wall. Rust streaked the corrugated metal, and weeds pressed up through cracked concrete. Rook led the way, nose low, his tail stiff. Suddenly he froze, body stiffening as his nose pressed toward a seam in the wall. He growled softly, low and deliberate. Ethan crouched beside him, listening. From beyond the wall came muffled voices. 3, maybe 4 men. Sergeant Vance signaled, and 2 officers moved to breach. The door swung open silently on oiled hinges. The team flowed in, shadows slipping across shadows. Inside, the warehouse was cavernous, the air thick with oil and damp concrete. Crates were stacked high, labeled as industrial chemicals, but many bore faint watermarks that betrayed tampering. Rook moved first, guiding Ethan and Alicia through a narrow hallway lined with broken shelving. His growl deepened as they rounded a bend. At the far end of the hall, 3 men stood in ankle-deep water from a leaking pipe. One was unmistakable, Marco Solano, a name whispered through law enforcement circles. Solano was in his late 40s, olive-skinned with sharp cheekbones and slick black hair combed back. His suit jacket hung open, revealing a pistol holster. His eyes darted wildly, assessing threats with the cunning of a man who had bribed senators and silenced witnesses. He was dangerous not because he carried a weapon, but because he carried networks of power. For years, he had eluded arrest through aliases and political payoffs. Tonight, under the warehouse's flickering lights, his empire was cornered. Rook barked sharply, teeth bared, his body angled like a blade. Solano sneered, raising his weapon. "Dogs," he spat. "Always the same." He barely had time to aim before Rook lunged. The German shepherd struck with the force of loyalty honed through a decade of service. Solano's pistol clattered to the floor, sliding into the water. Officers surged forward, subduing the other 2 men in seconds. Ethan dragged Solano up by the collar, his storm-gray eyes blazing. "End of the line." For a moment, Solano smirked despite his capture. "You don't even see the whole board," he hissed. "You're chasing pawns. Kendrick isn't a name. It's a fortress, and you just stepped into its gates." His voice dripped with menace, but Ethan pressed him against the wall, zip ties snapping around his wrists. Across town, Lana hit send on her article. Her headline screamed truth: shadow companies, silent roads, the Kendrick Empire in Willow Hollow. Within minutes, the story began spreading online, picked up by regional outlets. Lana leaned back in her chair, heart pounding, knowing she had just painted a target on herself. But she also knew that now the world was watching. Back in the warehouse, Alicia walked slowly through the stacks of crates, her hand brushing the cold steel. She paused, eyes narrowing at the faint stenciling on one box. The permit number matched one she had seen in Illinois. "They're running an interstate network," she whispered. "This isn't local. It's National Sergeant Vance barked orders, securing evidence and preparing transport." Officers moved in tight formation, but Ethan lingered near Rook, running his hand over the shepherd's damp fur. "Good boy," he murmured, pride thick in his voice. Rook pressed his head against Ethan's leg, tail wagging once before resuming his steady guard stance, eyes scanning the shadows as if expecting the fight wasn't finished. When Solano was dragged out in cuffs, the night air hit cold and sharp. Flashing lights painted the cracked pavement red and blue. Alicia glanced at Ethan, her voice quiet but firm. "We've pulled one thread." But Solano was right. Kendrick is bigger than this, and now they know we're coming. Ethan's gaze drifted toward the horizon, storm-gray eyes catching the faint glow of dawn. His jaw tightened. "Then we keep pulling until the whole web comes down." Beside him, Rook stood tall, fur bristling in the wind, a silent shadow ready to face whatever darkness came next. The sun broke clear over Willow Hollow for the first time in weeks, the air crisp and sharp, carrying a sense of renewal that the town had not felt in years. Main Street, usually quiet on a weekday morning, now buzzed with life. Banners of navy and gold were draped across the courthouse steps, the town's flag fluttering gently above. News vans lined the curb, their satellites tilted skyward, and townspeople clustered in tight groups, whispering about what had unfolded in the warehouse raid and the shocking revelations that followed. At the center of the commotion stood Mayor Douglas Whitmore, once a commanding presence in his early 60s, with a broad chest and a voice that filled any room. Douglas now seemed diminished. His once carefully combed silver hair looked thinner under the morning light, and deep lines furrowed his face. For decades he had thrived on his reputation as a pragmatic leader, willing to make hard choices for the prosperity of Willow Hollow. But prosperity had been tainted by compromise, and compromise had hardened into corruption. He had signed too many papers without reading between the lines, brushing off concerns, convincing himself it was politics as usual. And now, the truth was laid bare. Claire Whitmore stood near the podium, dressed simply in a pale blue blouse and black slacks. Her bruises had faded to yellowish marks, but her eyes burned with clarity. She no longer appeared as the frightened captive rescued from a cellar, but as a woman who had endured and emerged unbroken. When she caught her father's eye, Douglas looked away, shame burning brighter than pride. Ethan Monroe stood nearby, with Rook at his side. The German shepherd's coat gleamed after a bath, his amber eyes alert as he scanned the crowd. Children in the front row leaned forward, pointing at the dog in awe, whispering about the hero who had saved the mayor's daughter. Ethan rested a hand on Rook's neck, grateful for the animal's steady presence. Alicia Kingsley approached the podium first, her gray suit sharp, her black hair pulled neatly back. She spoke with the steady cadence of someone who understood the weight of her words. What we uncovered in that warehouse was not just a local crime. It was part of a network, one that used this town's trust as its foundation. Kendrick Holdings is under federal investigation. Their days of hiding behind permits and paperwork are ending. She paused, eyes scanning the crowd. But justice begins here. And it begins with honesty. Mayor Whitmore stepped forward, his hands trembling as he gripped the podium. For a long moment he said nothing, only looked at the faces of his townspeople, farmers, shopkeepers, teachers, men and women, who had voted for him, trusted him, and now looked at him with wary expectation. He drew a long breath, his voice breaking the silence. "I failed you." The words seemed to ripple through the crowd. Douglas swallowed hard. "I told myself that signing documents was just procedure, that growth meant jobs, meant progress. But I ignored warnings. I ignored my own daughter when she told me something was wrong. And because of that, she was taken from us. Because of that, this town was almost swallowed by shadows I refused to see." His eyes glistened, but he did not look away. "No more. From this day forward, transparency will not be a promise. It will be a requirement. And if I cannot uphold that, I will step aside." A murmur swept the crowd, some skeptical, others moved. Claire placed a hand on her father's arm, her expression not forgiving yet, but steady. "This is where it begins, not where it ends," she whispered. Subplot threads tugged at the edges of the ceremony. At the back of the crowd, Lana Breck stood with her notepad and phone in hand. Her auburn hair was pinned neatly today, but dark circles under her eyes betrayed the sleepless nights. Her article had spread statewide, picked up by national outlets. She had received threatening messages, anonymous calls in the middle of the night, emails warning her to retract. Yet, she stood firm, her pen moving quickly as she documented every word of the mayor's confession. Nearby, a plainclothes officer she did not recognize kept too close, watching her more than the stage. Lana noted his height, his stiff posture, and the faint scar that cut across his jawline. Her instincts prickled. She would follow up later. As the mayor concluded, Sergeant Daniel Vance called Ethan aside. His shaved head gleamed under the sunlight, his steady presence grounding. "Federal agents will be here within the week, but make no mistake, Keene is still out there, and men like him don't vanish. They adapt." Ethan nodded, his jaw tight. "Then we adapt faster." Rook barked once as if punctuating the vow. The ceremony reached its crescendo. Alicia gestured for Ethan and Rook to step forward, The mayor, voice thick with emotion, announced, "For bravery beyond the call of duty, for loyalty that saved lives, we honor Officer Ethan Monroe and his partner, Rook." He lifted the Maple Creek Medal of Valor and placed it around Ethan's neck, then knelt slightly to clip a smaller medal onto Rook's collar. The crowd erupted in applause, cheers rising through the crisp morning air. Children clapped wildly, adults shouted their thanks, and even skeptical faces softened in the light of the moment. Claire stepped forward, placing a hand gently on Rook's head. "He saved me when I thought I had no strength left," she said, her voice carrying. "And he reminded me that loyalty can light the darkest places." The applause swelled again, echoing across the square, carrying with it the fragile but undeniable sense that Willow Hollow could be reborn. Yet even in that moment of redemption, shadows lingered. Lana's phone buzzed with a message. "You've made powerful enemies. Watch your back." She tucked the phone away, her resolve hardening. The fight was not over. For Ethan, Alicia, Claire, and Rook, the ceremony was not an ending, but a pause before the next battle. The town had seen the truth, and now the world was watching. Summer crept gently into Willow Hollow, painting the fields in swaths of gold and green. The air smelled of cut grass and wildflowers, the kind of scent that carried the promise of renewal. On the edge of town, the old farmhouse, once cursed with whispers of ghosts and crime, now stood reborn. Its boards had been stripped, replaced with clean cedar siding, its roof restored, its porch swept wide and sturdy. Where once there had been shadows, now morning sunlight poured through freshly cut windows, and laughter sometimes echoed through the halls. Ethan Monroe leaned against the porch railing, a mug of coffee in hand, the steam curling lazily into the warm air. He wore a simple gray t-shirt and jeans, his storm gray eyes softened by the rare peace of the morning. The man who had once lived on edge, scarred by war and solitude, was learning the quiet rhythm of belonging. Beside him lay Rook, his black and silver fur gleaming in the sun. The German shepherd stretched his aging body with a satisfied groan, amber eyes half closed as he watched the breeze stir the fields. Though 10 years weighed on his joints, his spirit had not dulled. The scars across his flank remained, reminders of loyalty carved in flesh, but his tail thumped lightly against the porch boards whenever Claire passed. Claire Whitmore emerged from the farmhouse carrying a stack of papers, her blonde hair tied in a loose braid. She wore simple cotton slacks and a cream blouse, but her presence radiated steadiness. The bruises had faded, but what had replaced them was resilience, an inner strength that made her appear taller, firmer, as though every step she took reclaimed what had been stolen. She set the papers on the porch table with a sigh. "Petition signatures," she said. "Half the town wants oversight committees now. No more blind signatures." Ethan sipped his coffee, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Sounds like you've started something bigger than petitions." Claire settled into the chair beside him, her eyes following a pair of children biking down the dusty road. Her voice lowered. "I don't want to be defined by what happened in that cellar. I want this house, this town, to mean something new. A second chance." Their quiet was interrupted by the crunch of tires on gravel. A familiar truck rolled up, Deputy Kyle Mendez climbing out with his easy smile, his sandy hair catching the light. He carried a box under one arm. "Delivery," he said, placing it on the porch. "Thought you two could use some help settling in." Claire opened the box to find mason jars filled with peach preserves, a gift from Sarah Donnelly, a local farmer's widow in her late 50s. Sarah was tall and wiry, her long gray hair always tied in a bun, her hands calloused from years of working her land alone after her husband had died in a farming accident. She had a sharp tongue when it came to politics, often scolding town leaders at council meetings, but her heart was generous. She had dropped the preserves off at the station that morning with a note, "For the brave ones who remind us of light." Kyle leaned against the porch post, his blue eyes warm. "The town's changing. Feels strange, but good. Like we finally looked in the mirror." He glanced at Rook, who stretched and wagged his tail once. "And we owe a lot of that to him." Claire reached down to stroke the shepherd's head. "He's part of this family now." Later that afternoon, Lana Breck arrived, her auburn hair pulled back neatly, her notepad tucked under her arm. She looked tired but determined, her glasses catching the sunlight. She had been under police watch since publishing her article, after anonymous threats escalated, but she refused to leave Willow Hollow. Standing at the edge of the porch, she smiled faintly. "I thought I'd check on the heroes." Ethan chuckled softly. "Heroes are just people with stubborn dogs." Lana laughed, then grew serious. "The article has legs. Federal investigators are moving faster because the public won't let this drop. But Kendrick Holdings isn't gone yet. You should be prepared. Retaliation comes in waves." Ethan nodded, his jaw tightening, but Claire placed a hand on his arm. "We're not hiding anymore." As evening settled, lanterns flickered to life along the porch. The three of them sat together, Ethan, Claire, and Lana, while Rook lay stretched across the steps like a guardian carved of stone and fur. The cicadas sang, and fireflies blinked in the tall grass. Claire leaned back, her voice quiet but firm. "This house was once a prison. Now it's a home. That's the story we need to tell Willow Hollow, that even the darkest places can be reclaimed." Ethan raised his mug in a small salute. "To second chances." Rook lifted his head at the sound, tail thumping once, amber eyes catching the glow of the lantern light. And so, in the heart of Willow Hollow, under a sky scattered with stars, a farmhouse once cursed with whispers of ghosts became instead a symbol of resilience, loyalty, and renewal. In the end, this story reminds us that even in the darkest valleys, God sends us light in the most unexpected ways. Sometimes it comes through a loyal friend, sometimes through a moment of courage, and sometimes through the quiet miracle of survival. In our daily lives, we all face struggles that can make us feel trapped or forgotten. But faith teaches us that no night lasts forever. If we trust in God, He will guide us to hope, to healing, and to new beginnings. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs encouragement today. Leave a comment and tell us your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another story of faith and courage. May God bless each and every one of you who are watching right now. And if you believe in miracles, type Amen in the comments.